The presidential election in 2012 split the country along economic and, in many cases, racial lines. Political science professor Jeremy Lewis at Huntington College in Alabama says there's been a real division of emotions in his state.
Black community is quite happy with the re-election. A lot of the white community was opposed to it.
Nationally, more than 50% of white voters supported Mitt Romney, and more than 90% of black voters and about 70% of Hispanic voters voted for President Barack Obama. The president also won a majority of the votes from people who make less than $50,000 per year. After the votes were tallied, Obama captured 51% of the popular vote. But among those unhappy with the election results, a few came up with an unusual solution: a plan to secede from the Union. The methods they used were online petitions through a website called We the People. We the People is a part of the White House website that allows citizens to create and sign petitions about specific issues they want the Obama administration to address. Once a petition garners 25,000 signatures, the White House issues a response. We the People petitions have been created for a variety of issues, anything from agriculture and the environment to government reform and Social Security. Following Obama's re-election, several petitions emerged calling for permission to secede. This is an example of an experiment with direct democracy, or a system where all citizens are represented equally no matter how extreme their views. This is different than representative democracy, where leaders are elected to represent the views of the majority. Under the Obama administration's voluntary effort, the White House must issue a response for each petition that collects the required signatures. South Carolina, North Carolina, Alabama, Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Texas, and Louisiana all exceeded the 25,000 signature threshold. The response from the White House was a definite no. The response quoted a Supreme Court decision from the Civil War that says, "The Constitution, in all its provisions, looks to an indestructible union composed of indestructible states." The first petition to secede from the Union came from Alabama, and each petition created after uses the same language. Most of the petitions quote the Declaration of Independence. Governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and institute a new government. Of the states that met the petition signature threshold, all are south of the historic Mason-Dixon line. Lewis says that the secession flare-up could be part of the romantic Southern ideology of the South as a separate nation.
Southerners are very interested in history, and they have a pretty rich and interesting history down here. And so they tend to look back to the Civil War. So this is the only part of the U.S. that has been defeated like a country in most other places, especially Western Europe, have been defeated on their own soil. And so that history runs deeper than elsewhere. Okay? Now this protest is just an outburst of distemper, really, after the election. But it is just an expression of that romantic Southern culture, this dream of a white Southern nation.
Evidence of this romanticism can be seen at the Alabama State Capitol. The building is a monument to Civil War history. There are 4 coats of arms featured in the main rotunda of the building. Noticeably absent is the seal of the United States.
There are 4 coats of arms that were installed by Roderick McKenzie, who was the same artist that painted the 8 murals that are above the coats of arms. And he was asked to create coats of arms representing the countries of which Alabama had once been a part of. And so they start with Spain, and then France, Great Britain, and then the Confederacy. So if you include the Confederacy and the United States, there have been 5 countries. And so there were only 4 walls. And so
the historic Senate room does not display an American flag, only a Confederate one. The Senate room used today is in a different building that does display a U.S. flag.
The House decides what flags will be in the House chamber, and the Senate decides what will be in the Senate chamber. And so they chose to just revert back to what a Confederate flag would have been because it is depicted back to 1861. Okay. So,
in Alabama, where Civil War romanticism is a large part of the culture, Lewis says the opposition came mostly from the white community. And then can you just describe the sense of the community after Barack Obama got reelected? Was there anger, happiness? Can you just talk about that?
Yeah, there's a real division in Montgomery here between black and white communities. And so the black community is quite happy with the re-election. A lot of the white community was opposed to it. Now, the black community shifted in the civil rights period to vote for the Democrats, the party that had given them the vote. And so in 1965, a lot of black voters emerged under the new Voting Rights Act. So there's a polarization, and some of the white community are very disappointed that a Republican didn't get elected this time around.
Although there is no way to know for sure, Lewis suggests that the majority of petition supporters are white. There are 31,597 signatures on Alabama's petition, or less than 1% of Alabama's total population. Lewis explained that secession would be a messy business.
Separate all the laws that entangle us with the federal government. We could stop paying taxes to the federal government, but we'd have to give up the benefits. We would have such a complexity of unraveling ourselves from the national economy.
Secession would not only be messy, but it would prove costly to the state. According to taxfoundation.org, a nonpartisan tax research group, statistics from 2005 say Alabama gets $1.66 for every dollar it contributes to the federal government. If Alabama were to secede, the state would lose fiscal support from the government, sending its economy into a tailspin.
If all payments have been in dollars and debts are in dollars, and suddenly we have a new currency, there's tremendous disruption. So initially, we'd probably crash economically. And then when we become really cheap to buy from, then we could probably start to recover a little. But it would probably set us back, initially 40 years in economic development if we untangled ourselves suddenly from the federal government.
Because of these factors, it would be unlikely that Alabama or any other state could secede. The representative system of government is set up to keep extreme views in check. Lewis says the petitions have shown what happens when the United States experiments with direct democracy, or as he calls it, tallied democracy, which the country has little experience with.
So we don't know yet how well teledemocracy can be developed and whether people will take it seriously or whether they'll put silly comments in or whether they'll develop careful arguments. But some people hope that over the next 10 years we can get teledemocracy to work in a more meaningful way, to have a more meaningful discussion.
Reporting for Inside Eau Claire with Ellen Mattila, I'm Rachel Minske.